Have you heard about the Andy Warhol case and its impact on fair use? Let's talk to everybody's favorite IP and entertainment lawyer, Tony, to find out more.
My name is Tony Iliakostas. I'm an adjunct professor of entertainment law and IP at New York Law School, and I have an Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok account called The IP Professor that is dedicated to all things intellectual property.
This week, there was a ruling on a fair use case that might impact how creators are creating their content. So, Tony, talk to me a little bit about what went down with the Andy Warhol ruling.
Yes, so the Supreme Court recently ruled 7-2 decision in favor of Lynn Goldsmith, a photographer who sued the Andy Warhol Foundation of the Arts in a very unique transformative fair use case. So kind of a little bit of a TLDR for listeners out there. The heart of this lawsuit stems from a photo that Lynn Goldsmith, who is a photographer, a photo that she took of Prince, who is obviously the iconic musician who has now since passed away since 2016. So she took this reference photo of Prince in 1981 and licensed it also, I think that same calendar year, to Condé Nast for, basically whatever the standard license fee would be. Obviously, I'm sure that, we could get to the nitty gritty of it. Potentially it was for editorial use, what have you. But with that photo, then Condé Nast worked with Andy Warhol and in 1984, licensed that photo to Andy Warhol to then basically develop into a silkscreen print series that Andy Warhol called the Prince series. So it featured this one photo of Prince, obviously without the body, just pretty much a floating head of Prince, in a variety of different color schemes and color tones, very akin to the style of Andy Warhol that you commonly see if you were to go to MoMA or any other museum where his artwork is displayed. So Campbell Soup Can series, the Marilyn Monroe series, Elvis series, all of those kind of employ this very, I want to say, kind of ironic, avant-garde, I guess, methodology. I'm not an art major, so I'm just pulling out of thin air here. But all that to say, that's essentially the style that he evokes. So very much the same way you see with the Prince series. Now, fast forward all the way to 2016, Prince passes away. Condé Nast licenses one of those Prince series photos that belongs to the Andy Warhol Foundation, who is the executor of the Andy Warhol estate. They licensed one of those the orange print specifically, to put on the cover of Vogue magazine commemorating the life of Prince since his passing in 2016. Lynn Goldsmith sees it, says, "That's my photo." So she sues the Andy Warhol Foundation on the basis of copyright infringement, saying that that's her copyright, and they essentially created a derivative work based off of that. The counter argument that came from the Andy Warhol Foundation is, not so fast, fair use, which is obviously going to be the default argument that any person would make in a copyright infringement allegation, but more so in the case of Andy Warhol, because he himself was an artist. So the foundation argued that what he created would qualify as fair use, copyright fair use. And obviously, before we go any further, we've talked about fair use before, but briefly, fair use operates as a defense to copyright infringement so long as you use someone else's copyrighted work for criticism, commentary, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, or research. And in a case like this, the argument that any artist would probably make is that their use of someone else's copyrighted work is a commentary, a criticism of culture, of life, of maybe even the subject themselves. So that's essentially the argument that they made. I went through the entire federal justice system before I went all the way to the Supreme Court, and Lynn Goldsmith won every single decision before I went ultimately to the Supreme Court. And so the Supreme Court had to only deliberate on primarily one issue, which is whether or not Andy Warhol's creation of the Prince series qualified as transformative fair use. And transformative fair use falls under the first prong of the fair use doctrine, which looks at the purpose and character of the use. So that would be the part where you talk about what is the criticism, what is the commentary, what is the news reporting, so on and so forth. But there is this supplemental argument about transformative fair use, which essentially assesses what did you do with the original work? Did you transform it in such a way that that your new work has new expression, meaning, or message? And this actually stems from another Supreme Court decision, iconic seminal fair use decision that came out of the Supreme Court in 1994, Campbell versus A Cup Rose Music, that dealt with a dispute between Roy Orbison, the singer known for "Oh Pretty Woman," who sued Two Live Crew, a rap band in the 80s and 90s, for their rendition of Pretty Woman. Two Live Crew approached Roy Orbison asking for permission to use Pretty Woman. He said no. They went ahead and did it anyway. Their parody of Pretty Woman was very provocative, at least for that time, as at least way more provocative than what Roy Orbison was talking about. We'll keep it kind of family friendly, but to provide some perspective, the theme in the Roy Orbison Pretty Woman song is more of like traditional courtship, chivalry, that kind of thing, versus Two Live Crew is like catcalling at its finest. So all that to say, it's a very distinct message between the two, but the Supreme Court ruled in that case that what Two Live Crew created was in fact transformative from Roy Orbison's song, that it did evoke a new meaning, expression, and message, that there was a new kind of motif that was present in that rendition of the song versus the Roy Orbison song. So that case kind of carries over into this decision. And in fact, the 7 justices that agreed with Lynn Goldsmith used Campbell as the basis for this argument, and basically reinforced the transformative fair use argument to argue that you can't just say, oh, I changed the color or I modified Andy Warhol's Prince's look and say that that's transformative in nature. Right. That's just not enough. Mm-hmm. There has to be something more to it. And the bottom line is the Supreme Court said that both photos, or at least the Andy Warhol print series and the Lynn Goldsmith photo, evoke the same message. They both tell a story about Prince. They have him portrayed in a very specific manner. They're both they could be used in an editorial fashion to tell the story of Prince. But at the end of the day, Andy Warhol didn't do anything to transform the nature of the photo that Lynn Goldsmith took. So bottom line was there was no transformative fair use, and that was really the only prong that the court looked at. The 2 judges that dissented, Justice Kagan and Chief Justice Roberts, seemed to argue that, this kind of case kind of debunks then the nature of art, because art has a place where you do provide some type of criticism or commentary that, yeah, you may not transform it entirely, but it's enough to still provide some type of valuable commentary to culture at large. So it was a very interesting split there. I will say I am surprised that it was 7 justices that agreed with Lynn Goldsmith. I was actually expecting a more even split, somewhere around 5-4, maybe 6-3, but definitely 5-4. But I think from my takeaway here, this is a great decision in terms of not butchering fair use law as we know it. That was actually my greatest fear with this decision, that the Supreme Court was just going to come out of thin air with some type of new law for copyright fair use. Right. But it didn't. It just reinforced Campbell versus Acuff Rose music, but it does serve as a warning signal for any artist that is using the fair use doctrine in some capacity.
So this has impact on how we are creating our content then. If we are using something similar to what other people are doing, if we are using their content to then create something of our own, we can't just switch the colors and call it a day and claim fair use with that. So when we are moving forward with this, the answer seems a little bit obvious, but Tony, break it down for us. What do we need to do to make sure we're protected and not getting in trouble for claiming fair use when it really isn't?
So this is the part where you really have to do as thorough of an audit as you possibly can when you are going to argue fair use. Like I said, this is a warning signal for any artist. Just changing a color scheme or just changing a color tone or even cropping, that's not enough to evoke some type of message of transformativeness, at least now according to the Supreme Court, that has now created new precedent that is in tandem with Campbell versus Acuff Rose music. If you're going to use the fair use argument, this is where you really have to ask yourself, what is the criticism? What is the commentary? What is the news reporting, teaching, scholarship, or research? How many of the factors am I going to satisfy in all? If you are relying heavily on that first factor, the purpose and character of the use, and you want to make a transformative fair use argument, ask yourself, did I do enough to transform this work? And this is probably where you're going to have to work with a copyright lawyer to help you with something like this, especially if you're kind of paranoid. First, obviously, it's good to have that sense of closure anyway. But number 2, you definitely want to make sure that from a legal perspective, you really are trying to evoke kind of those principles of new expression, meaning, or message, things like that. But at the end of the day, it's a really tricky argument that would have to be made. It's all going to boil down to what message you're trying to evoke, generally speaking. And, essentially, as you, the artist or the creator, did you do enough to evoke that message? And, the legal eyes are probably going to not have the same artistic vision, but you know what? The law is probably going to be way more important than the artistic vision in a circumstance like this. So, sorry, artists. It's a protocol now that it's commonplace in our copyright system.
That makes a lot of sense. So best practices for this is to create your own content and not use other people's content, even if you're tweaking it, even if you're changing it a little bit, and always check with your lawyer to make sure that you are safe as you're moving forward with this before you take anything to the public eye. If you have questions on this, go ahead and drop those down below and follow along for more breaking updates on fair use, on copyright, on how you can stay legally protected inside of the entrepreneurial space. And as always, you can reach out to Tony on his social medias. Tony, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at the IP Professor, and you can check out my entertainment law podcast, End Scene, an entertainment law podcast every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
To stay legally protecting the entrepreneur space, follow along because Tony is coming back for even more episodes to get your questions answered, and we are helping you every single day to level up on your social media, save you time and effort creating your content so you can make more money, so that you can live your best life while still running your business. We'll see you in the upcoming episodes.